Hi, I'm Patrick Manning at Black Desert Resort. We are proud sponsors of Beyond the Game. I recognize that wins aren't always measured by points. Scoreboards don't always define champions, but the story this athlete has to tell, it does. This is why Black Desert Golf Course is proud to sponsor Beyond the Game to share this inspiring story with you. Please enjoy.
You're listening to the Utah Checkdown Podcast. And now your host, Josh Furlong.
Welcome back to another edition of the Utah Checkdown Podcast. I am Josh Furlong. And once again, as always, happy to be back chatting with you guys, trying to give you some updates on everything and kind of recap how the games went and all that kind of stuff. So before we jump into the game where Utah beat Baylor 23-12, let's tell you about our sponsors, Black Desert, who are helping with the KSL.com Beyond the Game video series. The videos highlight various athletes and give an inside look into their life. Recently, we talked with former Utah offensive lineman Garrett Bowles about how a second chance at life allowed him to pay it forward to troubled youth. You can check out that video and many others on KSL.com. Black Desert is a new resort destination in St. George that features a championship Tom Weiskopf 19-hole golf course that combines a private club feel with destination resort golf amid lava fields and 360-degree vistas. Black Desert is changing entertainment in southern Utah, and they're just beginning. Black Desert, where remarkable is within reach, home of the Black Desert Championship PGA Tour. All right, so let's get at it today. It's I'm in a different environment for this podcast today. So it's throwing me off a little bit, but we'll make it work. This is what we do. So before we jump into the game, I want to just kind of get this out of the way. The AP Top 25 came out, and Utah went down a spot. So they were originally 11 after the week 1, and then dropped down to 12. I know this causes a lot of frustrations for people, especially after a win. You want to see your team always rise and continue to move up those rankings, especially as teams like Notre Dame, which, speaking of Notre Dame, holy cow, I'm not going to get into that, but man, that was a rough loss. But when you have a team like that loses, Oregon hasn't showed out very well. There's some other teams maybe around them that haven't looked as good. It's frustrating to see your team fall in the rankings, especially when other teams who did struggle not move really anywhere. So I get it. It's an understanding that you want to be able to see that. So I get that. Now, as somebody that does vote in this poll, I don't know that it's an easy thing, right? Like, I look at my poll on Sunday night Saturday night. That's when we have to put it in. And it's not easy, especially on a week like this last one where there was so much chaos. Some voters are going to go in there and they're going to just continue to stick to their same script. They're going to look at things, somebody like Cam Rising getting injured, that's going to hurt a lot of people's view of Utah, and they don't really understand what's happening there, so might as well dock them for that. Other people are going to do a little bit more due diligence, and it's just a wide swath of people around the country who are going into this. So for the most part, I don't think it's anybody that's intentionally trying to hurt Utah. This isn't some conspiracy theory toward Utah, but I can see how it happens, right? There's teams on my ballot, for example. Let's look at Penn State. They barely got out of it with Bowling Green, where I don't love them, honestly. Like, I love Penn State as it stands because I think they're always consistent. They're always kind of in that range, top 10 type team, but they're not quite elite. But at the same time, they did struggle. And for me, for this week, I decided to kind of keep them relatively about the same. I think I may have dropped them one spot. I can't remember. But for me, it was like I wanted to be able to see more from them, right? And so they're kind of on watch notice to be able to see what happens, but I didn't drop them. Other people are going to drop them and kind of see based on their performance. It's tough, right? You're going to go from a week-to-week basis and kind of look at it that way. So everybody does it differently. Nobody's perfect, but maybe there is some rationale for some of these things. And unfortunately for Utah fans and Utah's itself, Utah did drop in the poll. Now, to that point, it doesn't matter, honestly. And I know you know that. You still want to be mad and be upset at the voters for what they've done. But more than anything, this shifts, right? Like we're looking at this from a different perspective now. There is now a 12-team playoff, which means that you're not really worried about where you're slotted in the rankings. Now, you are, especially if you're looking for an at-large bid. You need to build as high as you can. So there is value, right? And obviously the AP poll isn't the official poll of college football. It kind of is the quasi-official poll until the college football playoff rankings are released. The first one will be November 5th. Not a slow day, election day, nothing happens that day. But it's kind of a good estimation of where people are viewing you, right? It's not going to get necessarily any easier with a selection committee. It's just a different group of people doing it. And by and large, the AP and the college football playoff, they generally mirror each other for the most part, right? There's going to be some things that are off, but for the most part, it is a general good consensus of kind of where things are at. So it's kind of a good spot to look at. But at the end of the day, like I said, this is a 12-team playoff era. So now what you're looking at is, can Utah win the Big 12? And we're not going to know that after week 2, right? Obviously, their offense when Cam Rising is in, and we'll talk more about that, looks electric. They look like they were going to blow out Baylor by 50 points. Like I said, we'll get into that. But this is a team that if they can win the Big 12, it doesn't really matter where you're ranked. You could be 25th and win the Big 12, and you're still going to get in one of those top 4 seeds. So right now, it's really more concerning about that, right? For this last week, for example, going into the week, they were a number 3 seed. They were the 3rd highest conference that was ranked. They were just above Miami, so you had a 3 seed. Getting to that 3 seed is actually very valuable in the sense that you don't have to play that 4th seed, which then plays the 5th seed after they get out of that first round game. That first round game essentially could be the number 2 pick in the rankings and be an incredible team that just gets slotted into the 5th ranked spot because there's somebody else that maybe is higher than them in that number 1 spot. I know that makes no sense, but that's where we're at. You want to be able to try to get out of that 4th spot. So with that said, this is kind of where you're looking for it. If the Big 12 can stay above the ACC. We understand the SEC and the Big Ten are most likely going to take those number 2 seeds, especially this year. I don't see a world where, the SEC isn't one of those seeds. And the Big Ten, maybe if Ohio State doesn't pan out or whatever that may be, there's a chance, but I have to imagine that those are going to be the 2 seeds. So 3 and 4 seeds are essentially going to be a fight between the ACC and the Big 12. Whatever that jockeying of position looks like, it'll continue down the road. We're not going to know a lot of these things until the end, but that's what makes this fun. It's kind of training yourself, learning it. This is where you're looking at it, right? So yes, Utah did drop in the rankings by 1 spot, but more importantly, they were leaped by Miami. Miami now takes that 3 spot. Utah takes a 4 spot. Something to look at. I don't think there's anything to glean from it other than that's what you got to focus on. You're still getting a first-round bye if all goes well. So you're in the playoff. You get the paycheck. Everything's there. You can tout it as a program and say you're in the playoffs. But it's not the most ideal position at that 4 seed. So just kind of keep that in perspective as we go through these over the year. It's going to be different. The voting and the playoff and the rankings and all that other stuff, those are all going to factor in different ways than they ever have. And we're all kind of curious to see how it goes. Enough about that. Nobody cares about the AP poll, so why are we spending enough time? Let's go. We're going to talk about Utah beating Baylor. And there's going to be some things that I'm going to hit up in a future podcast this week, previewing the Utah State game. Utah is going on their first road game of the season, going up to Logan. So we'll hit up that and dive a little bit deeper, see what the players and coaches say, all that stuff. But let's recap this Utah game. So as I mentioned, Utah beat Baylor 23-12. If you were there or watching that game, there wasn't really much to stop Utah, right? In every facet of the game, Utah was absolutely dominating Baylor. Offensively, it wasn't perfect, right? They did start out on a 3-and-out, and things weren't always clicking. There were some missed passes, some missed things, a little bit of pressure, whatever that may be. But for the most part, the offense was clicking and everything was going well. Defensively, incredible performance. Just absolutely putting the pressure on DeQuan Finn, the quarterback there, and Baylor. Just really made it tough for them. After the first quarter, they had minus 10 total yards. Just weren't going anywhere, right? Utah was living in the backfield. They were putting pressure on them. Even if Baylor did get the ball, they maybe got 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 yards every once in a while. But they were going more backward than they were going forward. So good all-around effort. And, it was kind of funny in the press box. We were kind of joking that this is going to be a Utah team that might have to put Isaac Wilson in before halftime again because they're just going to be dominating and you want to preserve Cam. Obviously, you know what happened. Utah had to go to Isaac, but it was more because of Cam Rising getting injured. There was a hit out of bounds. You can argue whether it was a late hit. It was. The initial contact was not. It was a clean hit. Everything was there. But then as they were going further into the sidelines, the Baylor player, which I don't think he did it intentionally, it was just more kind of the natural way of doing things, extended his arms out and pushed him even further. I think Cam Rising still hits the Gatorade table, regardless. It was pretty close to the sideline. But at the same time, the push definitely didn't help, and Cam instantly comes up looking at his hand, grabs it, and they have to take him to the medical tent and eventually the locker room. That essentially changed the whole outcome of the game. It was pretty crazy. Let me get into some audio from Kyle today from his press conference that kind of talks about what happened and kind of the nature of it.
Offensively, like I said, we were doing some really good things, and then Cam went out, and everything kind of deflated, which was disappointing. Exact opposite should happen. If you lose a key player, then everyone else needs to pick up their game and pick up the slack. It's not just on Isaac Wilson to come in and pick it up. It's everyone around him. And so that's something that was probably the most disappointing thing in the game, is just the way we let the wind completely come out of our sails and not continue to move the football.
His use of the word deflated absolutely describes the scene there. If you were in that stadium, you saw it, you felt it. It was a complete tone change of everything that was going on. The closest that I can compare this to, and I know for Utah fans, you don't want me to bring this up, but it's the Kalen Clay, drop the ball before the end zone, that kind of shift where there was just so much energy in Rice-Eccles Stadium, so much fun. Everybody was living their best life because, Utah was rolling. Yeah, it was hot outside, way hotter than probably a lot of these September games are. But it's okay because Utah's rolling and everything's good. Maybe you leave by halftime because your team is up by 40. I don't know. I don't. If I'm going to go to a game, I would imagine you want to go to a whole game. But to each their own. Fan how you want, especially with how hot it was. I don't blame you with that. But with that said, there was this just huge deflation of energy. And it wasn't just the fans; it was from the team. The second everybody saw Cam Rising go to the sideline, I think there was some sort of 2023 PTSD that just kind of hit everybody. As much as everybody wants to point to it and say, yes, Cam is the leader of this team, and he is, right? It's unquestioned that he is, and how he goes, the team goes. He's kind of this rallying cry for everybody that when he gets hurt, instantly, they feel human emotions like we feel human emotions, right? The players aren't just immune to that, and everything changed. So you saw a completely different team come out there. As he mentioned, that's not all on Isaac Wilson. And to get a freshman who's in his second game to be the one that essentially rallies that's a very difficult task, right? It's not to say that the team doesn't rally around Isaac and doesn't have faith in him. They absolutely do. But to see your leader go out of the game like that is really demoralizing, and it hurts. And so you can't blame them, right? Even coming out of halftime, you can see that some of that was kind of still present. It was better, but it was tough. So an interesting situation for Utah. Everything was rolling. After the game, Kyle said we thought we were going to win by 40, and then suddenly everything stopped. This was a team that was doing everything they could, and then it just stopped. And Kyle mentioned the aspect of that where, they went into kind of preserve mode. You could see it. You could see that they weren't going to try to push Isaac too much. That's a lot to put on his plate. Once again, it wasn't 38 seconds like the first week, but it's still a tough situation to come in there, try to manufacture some offense after your leader has gone down, and expect to keep the ball rolling. It happens. There's players in college football that can do it. It's just a really tough thing, and it's not for a lack of Isaac trying, right? As I mentioned, it's an 18-year-old kid who's trying his best at his second game. And look, I'm not here to shill for Isaac or anything like that and kind of tout him up. I just think it's a tough situation, right? Like he understands the situation. He recognizes that he has to be better, but it's a tough situation. And Utah essentially became a shell of themselves. They became very much so like a 2023 offense where you were playing not to lose, essentially. You were going to rely on your defense. You were going to hope that they could protect everything and be fine. And given the way that Utah was dominating in that game, there was no need to stray from that script, right? Yes, you could have Isaac go out there and you could have him throw around the ball and try to get some things. And Utah did to some extent. You still want to take those shots because you don't want to become one-dimensional. But at the same time, they were playing not to lose. You had a comfortable lead, and yes, Baylor did put up 12 points, and those were a soft 12 points, I would say. But it was one of those games where Utah was fine, just taking the foot off the gas. They're going to do a prevent offense, we'll call it, and just do whatever they can to kind of manufacture what they need to, drain out the clock, which Utah was able to do, and then go on with the win. So I don't know that I'd read too much into it. I've seen a lot of reactions on Twitter and people down on this team, down on Isaac. Obviously, having Cam in the game matters, right? I think it's unquestioned that he needs to be in the game, and it changes the dynamic of the team when he's in there. But that isn't an indictment on Isaac Wilson and his ability to run the offense. It's just a situation of where he's at. Let me kind of get a quote that Kyle gave today about Isaac and kind of why it's tough for him to be in this situation, knowing that he's only played in one full game total, 2 full halves, and essentially is just doing this in very limited reps.
Yeah, that's something that is you look at, but when you split the reps in practice between the ones and the twos, it's not 50-50. It's like 80-20 or 70-30. You get the one guy, the first guy, tuned up completely and get as many reps for the second guy as you can. I think one thing that would definitely help Isaac is if he got those 80% or 70% of the reps all week long. I know he would be more advanced. Also, just more experience. He's been in a total of, one game of college football now, half last week, half this past week. And so I think he's going to continue to get better. We certainly believe that. And we have a lot of confidence in him. It's just he's not ready to go out and throw the ball 45 times and, against especially a team like Baylor and just not in his development, he's not quite there yet.
He said it well. You're getting in there, and he's getting about 20% of the reps throughout the week. That's tough to be able to understand where you need to go and then to be the backup, and get thrown into the game. There's a saying that, the hardest position is the backup when you get thrown into it, right? It's simply because you're expected to prepare like you're the number one guy. You're expected to kind of be ready for that moment, but you're given far less reps. You're giving far less of attention. And in his case, he's a freshman. This is his second career game of his entire life. The game is different for him, and you're going up against a Baylor team that they do have a good defense. I honestly I think this Baylor team, and I'm not just saying this because Utah get to win, so don't put that in there. But I think this Baylor team is honestly one that as the season develops, you're going to see some difference from them, right? They're going to develop. They're going to be better. They're going to be more in sync, and everything's going to be a little bit better. Even from that account, Baylor wasn't a terrible team on Saturday. Their defense is absolutely kind of more the standout aspect of that. They have good elements there. The pieces are there. It just needs to come together. And they're coming off of a season where they won 3 games. So you can't expect them to suddenly be an 11-1 team. It's going to take some time. But Dave Aranda's coaching for his job. He's coaching to be able to get these guys up, and they respond, right? Like, he knows what it takes to coach a defense. And so to throw Isaac into that situation, this isn't SUU anymore, right? And I understand, you can have your complaints about the SUU game as well. Whatever, it's his first game. There's a lot of these elements there, and talking to his dad a couple weeks ago, he's talked about how they have to stack good plays, right? Isaac has to go into this season knowing that, like, you're not going to be the hero, right? Obviously you can, but, like, there has to be these situations where you're going to stack good plays and continue to move on. He's going to go out there and do his best. He understands that he's not there yet, right? Like, this isn't Isaac coming out to the post-game press conference and saying, I'm the best guy out there. Why isn't anybody getting open for me? That kind of stuff. Not to throw Shadir Sanders out of the way, but he's not acting that way, right? He's not out there acting like everybody else is making the mistakes and he's God's gift to earth. Isaac understands his situation. He understands the tough spot. He also understands that he was put into this position to succeed. So if anybody's as hard on him, it's him and his family, because they want him to be able to succeed, right? Utah wants him to succeed. But as you heard Kyle say, they haven't lost any doubt or faith in him, right? Like, they believe in him. Obviously, belief doesn't necessarily translate to great offense or winning games, but he's moving along in his progress. They feel good about it. Kyle was asked about the hierarchy at quarterback. Do they feel like they need to mix in some other quarterbacks, a Brandon Rose or a Sam Heward in there? And he's pretty definitive about it. This isn't one of those things where it's like, well, maybe. No, it's Cam, it's Isaac, and then there's the other two. That's really where it is. You can ask Kyle however many times you want, and we've discussed this many times. Brandon's not ready for it. He's not the quarterback that's going to be able to get you any better than what Isaac is. And Sam, yes, he has D1 experience, and I think that can translate, is just so far behind in this offense that you're putting a guy that knows how to play football, but he doesn't know the playbook, and that's going to take some time. Maybe next year he and Isaac battle it out for the starting job when Cam leaves, but this is a situation where Isaac is your best option, and I know that frustrates people, and it's a really frustrating thing to see, especially knowing the expectations you have for this season, the optimism you have, and if Cam goes down, your whole life is relied upon on an 18-year-old kid who was playing for Corner Canyon last year. And yeah, he was dicing up teams there, but the high school experience is nowhere near the same as in the college experience. You can say that Utah is far better than all these Big 12 teams, and I'd have to agree with you, but it's so much different to be able to have a freshman quarterback go into that than a veteran quarterback who's been in the system, who understands it, who has that moxie, and can do what he needs to. Isaac is there. He has that. It's just gaining that confidence to continue to move forward. So, yes, be frustrated. He's frustrated. It happens, right? Like, this isn't a situation where Utah's blindly thinking that everything's good and just carrying on with it. If, kind of moving forward with this, if Isaac is the guy, this week, they decide to hold Cam out, and from what I've heard, this could either be a situation where they hold Cam out to be able to preserve his health, but it sounds like he could play. I don't want to speak definitively on that because, there goes a lot into throwing motions and kind of how your hand feels. I understand some sentiment saying, just preserve him just to be able to get him healthy for Oklahoma State. I agree with that, but at the same time, you also need him getting reps. He hasn't played for a year, and yeah, he's got reps in practice, but you want him to get those game reps as well. So if he's healthy enough to play, in my opinion, and I think many would probably agree, is you have to play him. You have to get him through those reps, get a comfortable lead, maybe go up even by 14, right? It doesn't even have to be super crazy. Let your defense work, and then throw Isaac out there. Give him all the reps. At the same time, that's, once again, still not allowing Isaac to be able to get the majority of the reps. So Utah has to decide early on in this week, and I have, full belief that they have, but they have to decide early this week, okay, is Isaac the starter or is it Cam? And if it's Isaac, they have to give him the majority of the reps. Like Kyle talked about, it's an 80-20 split. You've got to be able to have him in there taking a majority of those reps. If you're preparing all week for Cam and then he's a late-minute scratch, that absolutely hurts Isaac, right? Like that hurts your game plan. That doesn't help anything. So, you've got to decide that early. And if Cam can't go, so be it. But you can't go through this week, expecting one thing and then flip it to the other. Things happen. So it's not like that's not out of the realm of possibility. But you've got to get Isaac the reps. And if you can, they believe, at least Kyle said, that the game plan doesn't change from what Cam presents, right? They believe that they can still pass the ball around. They believe that they can be dynamic on offense. Those same players, those skilled players are there. Isaac now just has to hit him. Yes, he's got to make some changes. He can't hold on to the ball as long. He can't try to hit into windows that aren't there. And Utah State has a good defense, so it's not like this is just going to be a cakewalk. But you've got to be able to get that progression ready and be ready to go. So, with that said, I think that's enough about the quarterback situation. That's obviously what's on everybody's mind. Everybody wants to know about the quarterback. At the end of the day, I don't think this is too serious that fans have to worry, right? Even if Isaac starts this week, I don't know that fans have to worry. Now, caveat there, if this injury for Cam does make it difficult for him to throw the ball, yes, you do have to worry, right? And it's going to impact it to some degree. But as you've seen, Cam played on a hurt knee all of the 2022 season. It's why his injury was even harder to recoup from, because it was already damaged, right? And so when he tore his ACL, that made things difficult. He's not opposed to playing hurt. He's going to do it. He's going to put his body on the line, as he's shown many times, and that frustrates some people, and it frustrates Kyle Whittingham sometimes. But he's a guy that wants to go out there and win. He understands that this is his last hurrah, right? The NFL is probably not his future. He might make a practice squad there, or if he has it goes on a tear this season, maybe there's a chance. But this is essentially his last hurrah, and so he's going to be out there and try to do whatever he can. He wants to win a Big 12 championship just as much as anyone else out there. He's not trying to sit there and collect a paycheck and ride the bench. This is a guy that absolutely wants to be on the field. So it's not all doom and gloom. I get it. It feels that way sometimes, especially when your starter goes down. But this is a team that is still capable of doing whatever it needs to be able to beat these teams. Now, with that said, this is not a perfect team, right? You're looking at it, just kind of running over some of the key stats. First off, Utah finished with 292 total yards. And, you take that with a grain of salt, because Utah was doing well and then essentially sputtered to a stop. But it's still something that they want to improve. Beyond that, they were getting 4.9 yards per play, 4.6 yards per rush. That rushing number is really kind of what I wouldn't say frustrates Kyle, but it's a number that he wants to see improve. He said his benchmark is essentially 5 yards per run on average that he wants to see. And they didn't get that against SUU, which was, I wouldn't call it concerning, but it was something that they were frustrated by. And then they didn't get it again against a better Baylor defense. So you want to see more run. You want to be able to get more of that, more run production. Kyle talked about how good Mekhi Bernard was and has established himself to be in that conversation of RB1. He wouldn't quite go so far as saying that he is the guy, but I mean, honestly, there's not really been anybody else to compete with that. Yeah, you have Dijon Stanley, you have Mike Mitchell, and Jalen Glover's somewhere in the mix. He did not get any touches last week. He didn't even get in the game. So that's one to monitor, but Kyle had said that he wasn't a part of the game plan. So take that for whatever it is. He didn't touch on it anymore today, but you can kind of read into that how you may, and kind of see where it is. I think they still think that Jalen has potential, but there is maybe something to be said that other guys are doing more or being more productive than Jalen. Now, once again, Jalen can do some things, but he's got to continue to show it out on the field. So with that being said, if Mekhi is your guy, if he's your guy, you know what you're going to get. He's not going to be your big bruising back, but he's not bad either. He was getting some good carries. He was doing what he needed to be able to move the ball. Finished with 118 yards on 19 attempts. That's about 6.2 yards per carry. So if you're getting that level of production from him, you've got to be happy, right? That's clearly over that 5 yards per carry. He did well, and yes, one of those was a long run, a 30-yard run, but that's all part of it, right? You want him to be able to have those ones where he sees some daylight and he breaks forward and everything goes well. Bernard is I think you can put him in his own little level right now. Beyond that, you need to see more production from some other guys. Now, Mike Mitchell, we talked about how everybody was expecting him to be this guy and maybe potentially take it over. Some of him has been hampered by injury, right? He's hurt his ankle. You saw him hurt it again in Baylor. I don't know that we're going the Jaquindon Jackson route where, you're going to have to tape up his ankle periodically and then roll him back out. but maybe that's the situation. It's not easy to manage an ankle injury as a running back, as you can imagine. And so, that's something to monitor. So if he's limited, that changes the dynamic of this team. However, they do utilize him in that third down spot, right? If you need a couple yards, they feel confident in what Mike has, his bruising ability, that he can get in there. Outside of that, if Jalen isn't going, it appears that Dijon Stanley is getting more touches. There were moments where he actually, ran the ball more than what he was utilized in the Southern Utah game. He was also used in a trick play where the fake was to him. And I have to kind of a side note there. Brilliant strategy by Andy Ludwig to be able to build him into that game plan in week 1. And I don't know that Andy expected him to go off for, these 2 long wheel route touchdowns. But you schemed it in a way that now teams have to focus in and key in on him. Kind of like a Sione Vake, where if he's on the field, you've got to be very mindful of where he lines up and what he does. And so if you can utilize fakes or utilize different things to be able to help the offense, that does a tremendous amount, that allows for a tremendous amount of help, right? Andy Ludwig can kind of scheme to that. Get them to bite on him and then maybe relax a little bit because they're like, oh, they're just using him as a fake, and then roll him out and punch him for 20 yards or something. I don't know. I think that's the game within the game that I think Andy Ludwig is so good at. But you still have to kind of have all those other elements there. So if they can continue to get a good run, if they can continue to try to find opportunities to get more of a passing game, especially if Isaac is in, that allows this Utah team to do well. And I think if that passing offense continues to go well, then I don't think the run game is too much of a worry, because I think you're going to get aspects that are relaxed on defense. You've got a team that is now, if you're moving that ball really well, they're going to relax a little bit more, maybe drop some more guys in coverage to try to prevent that, put more guys in the middle of the field to stop the tight end play, different things that way. Now you've relaxed that line. They're not expecting as much, and then somebody on the in the run game can break free. So it's all complementary, as you know. This football is a very difficult game because they all play off each other. You can't just say we're going to go throw a pass here because we want to. Yeah, you can, but it all plays into the scripting of what it is. Essentially, these offensive coordinators are writing a story, right? They're telling a story and how they want the game to go, and it's not always going to go by script, and that's what makes the best coordinators out there, is the ones that can adjust and kind of go off script a little bit. But for the most part, these games are scripted. Every team does it. This is not like something where, Andy Ludwig is looking at the play clock and saying, okay, I've got this, let's go here, right? To an extent, there's some of that, but they have specific situations. If you're 1st and 7, if you're 2nd and 15, these are the types of plays where you're going to run. This is where we want to be. This is how we want to develop the game. That's how it's going to be. So all of these are absolutely instrumental in the makeup of the game. I don't need to explain football to you. You understand it. But at the same time, I think that goes into where this game can be. So interesting way to see how they go about that. But for sure, the run game needs to be more effective. They like kind of where it is. Obviously, offensive line needs to kind of improve still a little bit. Much better, I would say, than week 1. Still want to see more there, and you see through the offensive line's progression over the years. They're always kind of getting better as the season goes. Everybody, in years past, you've seen like people really mad at Jim Harding for his offensive line not being ready. It happens, right? Like, I don't think that's anything to Jim Harding. You're putting guys out there that they're playing their first reps. They've got to gel together in a way that practices can't show. And then as the season develops, that offensive line becomes one of the best in the conference. So curious to see how that develops, but I think Utah's already further along in that offensive line progression than they have been in years past. So if you can continue to get these other elements to work, obviously Cam being healthy is a major one, then that bodes well for you. Outside of that, the biggest miss, obviously, is the field goals. Holy crap. Cole Becker missed 2 makeable field goals. These were not something that we've seen from him traditionally. These weren't even like they just were close to the uprights. These were clear misses. So you have to imagine that Kyle is going to get that corrected. That's not something that he's shy about talking about. If you remember from a few years ago, he threw those specialists under the bus, and told them that he needed to get better production out of them. We've seen this out of Cole. Cole's been a great kicker for Utah, so it's a little out of the norm that he's there. But that only makes you work harder, and you have to hope that is corrected. If that's not corrected, even if Cam is back on the field, that becomes a concern, right? Not every drive is going to turn into a touchdown with Cam Rising under center. You need a reliable and consistent, place kicker to be able to get Utah to where they need to be. A lot of these games have the potential to be won or lost in the kicking game, and if you can't get that going, that is a world of hurt, right? Obviously, there was also a botched PAT. That didn't help matters for Utah, so it's a whole collective situation here. Punting, they got too many touchbacks. They weren't too happy about that. They wanted to pin them down a little bit more. So it's not just Cole Becker, it's Jack Baumeister. You've got to be able to have a collective effort and get there. So I think these are good things to have right now in the season, right? If you're going to have these problems, now is the time to have it. The hope is that you're not moving this forward into the rest of the season. You've got another game against Utah State where I'm not saying Utah State can't beat Utah, but I think you've got a much easier chance to kind of put some of those things into practice, allow yourself to have some mistakes still, and then continue to address them and move on. But you've got to start hitting on these things. This is the game where things have to start looking a little bit better, so that as you go into that Week 4 game where you're going to be in a hostile environment against Oklahoma State, which was announced as a 2:30 or 2 o'clock kick on Fox, you've got now a national audience watching. Oklahoma's ranked high, Utah's ranked high. This is going to potentially be 2 top 15 teams coming into a game that is absolutely going to dictate kind of the tone and tenor of what this Big 12 title race is going to look like. So if you can't get those things fixed in this Utah State game, that's a world of concern, right? And I know there's a lot of things going on beyond that, but I think this is a situation where you should still be optimistic. I feel like looking on Twitter and kind of hearing from other people around me that there's been a lot of pessimism, and that's fandom. But I think there's still plenty of things to be optimistic about for this Utah team. Like I said, it's not my job to provide that for you. I'm just here to present the information. But I think this is a team that is ready. You've got a defense that is already hitting. They're doing some phenomenal things out there. They've got a lot of talent. You've got several players that have done well. And how about Scooby Davis for kind of holding it down on his end? He gets the start opposite of Zemiah Vaughn at the corner spot. So far, so good. He's looked really well. He's looked the part. I believe it was Saturday night. Kyle had said that if he continues on this trajectory, that he's going to lock down that starting position. But I think they feel like they've still got enough. Defense is obviously still going to win them games, but you have to hope that the offense improves and things move forward, because this has the potential to be a dynamic offense. Nothing has changed. I think obviously if Cam's out, things can change a little bit, but I think the players there around Utah, around Cam Rising or Isaac Wilson are phenomenal. It's just a matter of trying to find ways to scheme to them and getting them the ball. So with that said, the last few things is, obviously everybody's going to be looking for Cam Rising returning on Saturday. Is he a go? Kyle's not going to talk about any of those injuries. Karene Reed did leave early because of a leg injury. I believe it was an ankle, if I'm not mistaken. So that's something to watch. But I think, defensively, losing a guy like Karene Reed would probably be bigger than most people think. He is kind of that heartbeat of the defense, and you saw some of that in that second half where things kind of relaxed a little bit when he wasn't out on the field. He's a guy that just understands the system so well. He's in the right spot all the time. He gets guys in the right spot all the time. You want him on the field. I don't know if he's going to be available on Saturday. My guess is they potentially leave him off the roster just to kind of preserve some health and get him ready for Big 12 play. But he's a guy that absolutely means a lot to that defense, and getting him back on the field is the biggest interest, I should say, outside of Cam Rising. Outside of that, there was Keanu Tanavasa. He was held out of the game. He was injured, a little banged up, but the expectation is that he'll be good to go, and that Utah is relatively healthy. So this is a good spot for Utah to be in. You want to go up and get Utah State in the first road environment. There's going to be a lot of hostility up there. Last time Utah went up there, they lost, so you want to kind of cleanse that from the palate and move forward. A lot has changed, obviously, since that 2012, there's a lot of 20s in there, 2012 season. Utah's changed a ton, but that doesn't mean that Utah State isn't capable of winning. So you got to kind of pick your battles and do what you can, not overlook them as you're looking to Oklahoma State. That becomes the biggest danger. And as you saw with a team like a Notre Dame, they kind of read their own press clippings and thought they were already a shoo-in for the playoff. And now there's a good possibility that they're not. So, Utah has a little bit more flexibility for itself in the sense that you have to win the Big 12. So dropping a game to Utah State isn't the worst thing. I would contend that it is, just because you can't lose games like that if you're going to be a playoff contender. But at the end of the day, you just have to win the Big 12. So, but you need positive momentum. You need to be able to go into that Oklahoma State game hitting at least at a good rate. You don't have to be perfect, but you have to be able to come out of there healthy. You've got to be coming out of there with some momentum and some optimism going into that game, because if not, this is going to be a place that's going to be incredibly difficult for Utah to play. You kind of saw that when Utah went to Washington last year. Honestly, should have gotten a win there. They decided to take their foot off the gas. Everything changed there. And then the next week they go to Arizona, and there's just not a lot of motivation for that game. Totally different circumstances. Utah was beaten down by that point. Once you lost to Washington, you were officially out of the Pac-12 title race. So there's different things there, but I think it's that same type of mindset where you have to approach this game, come into it with the right mindset, and approach Utah State as if they are like an Oklahoma State, right? You're going in there. I think it's Kyle or some other coaches have always said that, they're not quite the wounded dog, but you have to respect them because really Utah State has nothing to lose. They've got a new head coach that's playing for his own job. You've got a team that's trying to rally around and try to shake off what happened in a blowout loss to USC. This is a team that can be absolutely dangerous now that you're coming into their venue, and they want to prove that they are one of the better teams in the state. So tough environment. Look forward to it, and we'll get into more of Utah State this week. But we're going to call that an end for today. There's still a lot to talk about, and we'll continue to move forward with it. But got a few days to meander about that and get your feelings out of the way. I don't know. But yeah, we'll hit you up again this week and preview the Utah State game. But for that, we will call it a day. Have a good one.